It's really weird because I tend to conduct a lot, which means I stand at a podium, and that is a comfortable thing. But this podium, first of all, I'm not a tall person, so it makes me feel a little bit cramped. But I also don't like talking at them very much, but I don't mind talking. Good evening. I didn't know that I was giving a speech, but I'm very happy to, get up in front and talk with people. I'll cover a few materials. We'll talk a little bit about Against the Grain when it comes around. But sort of the interesting thing that first came to mind and that Joel brought to my mind, and it's something that we should all likely talk about once we get to the talking bit of this, is sort of what the direction of music in this city and arts in this city, what is that direction going to be? And one thing that Joel mentioned that I think is interesting to point out is that for the longest time, many of us who were growing had to leave. And I think there's still a bit of a feeling that like you have to leave and gain some kind of exposure or fame. This happens with writers. You think of Mordecai Richler left Canada and he disparaged it for a while, and then he came back and he's a celebrated person, except maybe in Quebec. But there's an idea that Canadians have to leave and succeed elsewhere, and then they're welcomed back as, oh, look, we've created this great thing. And I don't disparage the notion that people should leave to, gain the fullest experience in life that they can. But I don't agree necessarily that one should have to leave one's home or one's home country and not be a part of building, the infrastructure of art in, the community that you're a part of. And that's another key issue. I'm a Torontonian. I currently work a lot in Calgary, which is a job that I got 2 years ago. And there's a lot of talk that happens in the arts in general about what is the focus of arts organizations and how do they thrive, especially in certain mediums like classical music that are a little bit more niche and perhaps not as consumable as very bad Hollywood films. And one aspect that I think we have to concern ourselves with a lot is how we engage community and how these organizations become a part of the community and define the community and change the community. Another thing I would really love to talk about at some point, and I bring it up only because I'm interested in other people's views about it, but when you're talking about politics and music and how cities and provinces and countries fund their arts organizations, I think it's something to really think about, to change the model a little bit about how we do it in North America. Because if you've been to Europe, you know perhaps that a lot of the way that they thrive there is because they don't fear. They might fear failure in a professional sense, but they don't necessarily exist under this existential threat of closure. And they don't have to worry so much about business. And I know I sound a bit like an idealist, but sometimes, the other side of the coin that is very, when we artists and musicians and stuff and companies are going to these councils or talking to politicians at large, or even going to the community, we have to sort of pretend as though we've fulfilled some sort of economic function. And I think it's totally good to give facts and numbers about what we bring to the city from a tourist standpoint, how many people eat at restaurants after they go to the opera. But I think an even larger and more important thing is, what does it actually do for our culture? And that's a thing that people don't really talk about very much because it's a bit high-minded. And money and economics is another issue that we can ground ourselves in. It's something we should talk about, I think. I think this country is ready for a broader idea of how to fund the arts and how to not just support arts, but grow arts and change the way the culture exists. Because the city is an international city now, and Canada has a much larger place in the world, and so I think we're ready to do that. In our small part, we try to do that as individuals, Joel and I, and as a company. I actually interesting. The reason I mentioned that about Canada being a place that you leave is because most of my education is actually not Canadian. And I'm not saying that everyone has to do this, but I studied as a pianist in France. I lived in France when I was a kid. And then all of my university training is in America. I went to a place called Eastman, which is in New York. And then I came back with a certain skill set, and I wanted to really define my professional life. And then I had this opportunity to work as an apprentice at the Canadian Opera Company. And subsequent to that, I've done most of my work in Canada with some work in Europe. And I've been able to grow here. And as I like it here, I like being here, and I want to be a part of whatever happens in the growth of this city and its music. So Joel and I engage ourselves in any number of musical exploits with any number of organizations, and we have this company that Joel created, which had a mandate to do not necessarily only opera, I should add, theatrical works, contemporary classical works, sometimes purely abstract classical music. Basically, we've run the gamut in terms of our programming. And the point is to do it in ways that are perhaps a little less conventional, so not at Roy Thompson Hall and not at the COC. And that is not done in any kind of, with any kind of agenda of aggression, because we have no qualms with these places. We work with these organizations all the time, and we love them, and they need to be sustained. But there are a variety of ways in which you can experience classical music and performing arts in general. And sometimes the best way to do it in a culture where we're accustomed to television, and the greatest works of art that you see happen daily on Netflix and stuff like that. So you want a more intimate experience. It's hard to get that sometimes in a large space. And so we try and do works that you might not think of in strange spaces. We've done, for instance, the Handel's Messiah in a very weird, unconventional kind of way with a lot of dancing, strange movements. I conducted in jeans, which is frowned upon among my colleagues, and we did that at the Opera House, not the Opera House where opera happens, but the Rock venue on Queen Street East. That's one example. We did a modern, Joel does a lot of really great translations. We actually call them transladaptations, which is a translation and adaptation smashed together, of old pieces, and he sort of sets them in new contexts, like in modern day Toronto. So the famous opera La Bohème he's done in Toronto was set at the Transact Club. The next project that we're doing is, I confess, a little bit heavier than some of the other things we've done. We're taking 2 song cycles. Now, a song cycle, does anyone know what that means when I say it? Song cycle. Jenna Douglas does. Okay. Give me 5 seconds. If you get bored, you just start counting down and say you need to stop talking about this. But an art song is basically the 19th century equivalent of a regular song like we think of now, like a Beatles song. And a song cycle is basically a concept album. So it would be the equivalent, Schubert's equivalent of Sgt. Pepper. And so you have a story, a narrative, and a cycle of songs that are sung by a singer. They were originally conceived to be performed in settings that are quite similar to this, people's houses. In the 19th century, they had a little less to do, so they had the time to do these kinds of things. And we're taking a piece by Schubert called Die schöne Müllerin, The Lovely Maid of the Mill, which is a story about a young chap who falls in love with a pretty girl who's the daughter of a mill guy. And it's a boy meets girl story, but it doesn't happen well, and he likely ends up killing himself at the end. So it's dark shit that we cover, even in real life now. And we're pairing that with a piece by a composer called Olivier Messiaen, who was a French composer who died only 20 years ago or so. A maverick, a really kind of over-the-top, interesting composer who was influenced by all your famous people like Stravinsky and stuff. And he was an ornithologist, so he loved birds. He went around and collected birdsong and then translated it into music, and wrote these really massive orchestral soundscapes. It's crazy contemporary music. It's very interesting. It's also very beautiful and transcendental in a way. So we're taking these 2 pieces and we're smashing them together. The whole point of this really is just to get people to come to, an arts event and have a new experience. If they're very well versed in this type of repertoire, then it's fine, they're going to see it in a different way. And if you're not, this is an easy way to access it. We all love our drink, so you can drink at our things. It's not about wearing clothes, although people can dress nicely, it doesn't matter. It's really just about having a very fulfilling arts experience. And I think these kinds of things and the sort of diversity of artistic expression and experiences that one can have in the city are what we should be striving for as a group. So, I don't know, that sort of amounted to some kind of speech, and it'd be great to have a dialogue now. I think the real way to accomplish stuff is through dialogue, so thanks very much.